Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020, and I'm back with another live show. Hope you enjoyed the long 4th of July holiday weekend. And boy, it seems like it's been a long time since the last show, but of course it's only been a week, so here we are. And I thought today we would take a look through open trades like we typically do. And there's actually quite a few of them. And part of the reason is that the market has been holding on pretty well. So let's jump right in here. Here's got some lines drawn on the SPY, and amazingly enough, over the past, really since the beginning of June, right? What date's that? 6/5, 6/4. Well, there's June 1st back here. So market's kind of been, or the S&P anyway, has kind of been in like sort of a sideways type of box here, I suppose you could call it. I could draw a square box around that whole area. So, interestingly enough, there you go. So, there's since the beginning of June, right? There's the high and the low. And so, kind of trapped inside of this little range here. You can see I have a downtrend line drawn across the all time high and these recent highs. So, this high was on June 8th, which was literally 1 month ago today, because today's the 8th. And market's sort of struggling to get back to where it was a month ago. Although, quite frankly, last time I was doing the show, we were talking about these up down days here, and so we managed to basically rally off of the low. So that was a week ago Monday. Actually managed to bounce off of that and sort of rally back up, close this gap. There's a couple of gaps here that got closed, and so there's basically the big picture. S&P is amazingly close to the all-time high. There's this downtrend line here that, let me switch over to SPX. Do I not have the downtrend line drawn on SPX? Huh. Well, sometimes I keep my S&P chart real nice and clean, but there we go. Same sort of thing. Really close to it, right? You just wonder if this is gonna offer much overhead resistance. The weird thing is, typically you draw trend lines across, like you see on the other chart. I had a trend line drawn like that. When they're real far apart like this, the touches on your trend line, I believe that they're probably less valid. Although, in theory, well, not in theory, mathematically speaking, right? That's part of the cool thing about technical analysis is sometimes there's just certain undeniable scientific mathematic things in technical analysis like this. The S&P can't get to a new high without breaking above that trend line, right? Mathematically impossible. That doesn't mean it can't gap over it or whatever, but until the market gets above that trend line, it can't get to a new high. So anyway, it seems like a reasonable point of resistance. Um, Connect a couple of recent lows here, and you get sort of like a little triangle that the market's in. And so there's every possibility that it just breaks through it, and then of course, these highs would present a little bit of overhead resistance, right? And the theory behind that is maybe some participants, bought at the tail end, got FOMO and bought at the tail end of this rally. And then they got trapped up here and the market, sold off. And so when it comes back up here, in theory, there might be some sellers. That's sort of the thought process behind overhead resistance, is that when the market rallies back to where it was a previous high, there might be some sellers looking to get out or get even or whatever. So anyway, it is what it is. Now that I've drawn all this stuff on here, it's going to be difficult. That's why I have one chart that I like to keep kind of marked up, and then on my SPY, and then I typically keep my SPX chart real clean. So check this out. The Dow. The Dow is in like some sort of big giant triangle here, and is more towards the lower end of the triangle than actually trying to break out above that. So that looks like a little bit more of a sort of a parabolic run back in May than the S&P had. And of course, the Nasdaq 100 is, I drew a horizontal line at the previous highs here, and so this thing is just blown right through there. This is an extremely persistent uptrend. And I mean, it looks like it's getting stretched, but it got kind of stretched here, and then you had a little sell off, and then another higher high and a little sell off, which is interesting because it literally, there was a retest of the actual breakout back here, and then it's launched again. So some of these stocks are just insane. I mean, Amazon, I was looking at Amazon, you talk about a parabolic stop. Look at the run up this thing's just had, and the craziest one is Tesla. Tesla just parabolic. I mean, these type of runaway gap up moves just sort of they sort of indicate short squeezes, right? I mean, it has to be a short squeeze. So I'm sure you've seen some of the, Tesla's worth more than like, most of the big giant corporations that you can think of. Their market cap, market cap is like way bigger than any other car company in that. So, certain stocks, like when you see something like this, and of course, there's a pretty legitimate story behind Amazon and, Microsoft and Apple and all that. But when you see something like this, well, it reminds me of like the dot-com days, So a little bit. So there's a lot of frothiness in the market. But anyway, it is what it is. So the market is the market, and Russell 2000 is I think I read something the other day that said that something like the top, like the FANG stocks or the top 4 or 5 Nasdaq stocks, the top certain amount of Nasdaq stocks, very small amount, the usual names, have a bigger market cap than like the entire Russell 2000, which is pretty incredible. But I mean, there's no question that there's a small group of stocks that everybody's familiar with that are basically, in charge of the whole market. And then the further that you dig down, the weaker their actual participation is. So I was looking at look at the financials. So there's a lot of sectors that had the big sell off, and then they bounced, and then they're really weak now. Airlines are interesting because they had the big sell off and just kind of, but then they had this like really quick rally at the beginning of June, and then they're fading it. So you can see this, like the rally happened in just a few days when everybody thought hey, the virus was played out or whatever. And so look at American. Anyway, a lot of these things have faded back down. Gold breaking out here. Like the price of gold is actually, I mean, the price of gold is like 1,800 or something like that, but it's actually breaking out to new highs, like all-time highs in U.S. dollars. So that's kind of interesting. See, silver's kind of trying to break out too, but way below the all-time highs. So that's sort of an interesting thing. It's just a sector by sector type of thing. You look at the like XLE energy. Actually, I like to look at XOP. XOP is a better representation of the energy sector. So, I mean, look at that. Really beaten down, and then just, I mean, a huge bounce doubled, right? And then it's just sort of pulled back. Look at that. There was it was on the pending list, but never had a close above trigger price. So anyhow, moving on, what I thought we would do is take a look at the open trades here and start down from there's a lot of open trades given the fact that look at that 17, given the fact that, like, at one point there was only a few. There was only, a few open trades, and then the pending list started growing and growing. And then as the market has been pretty cooperative, with certain sectors, then a lot of the stocks on the pending list have ended up triggering. And interestingly enough, a lot of them have been doing so well that they just keep going up, right? Especially some of these older ones have gone. I mean, look at some of the percentages, and this is as of last night's close. So anyway, a lot of these have just kept going up, and so the way that the system works, well, we'll dig right into it. We'll start with the oldest one here, Fate, and so I think you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. So yeah, Fate triggered in like over here at the beginning of June. Actually, not the beginning, but like June 9th. And and initially it pulled back, but then pulled back for a couple of days and then started climbing. And you can see that basically just pulled back, started climbing again. This was the one that I've always talked about it triggering in prematurely, right? Because it wasn't really supposed to trigger on a bar that looks like that. Although I did mention that a lot of times, a big bar like that can kick off a big rally. So there must have been some news or something there, but anyway, you can see how this is played out, and I mean it's a little erratic, I guess, from day to day. A lot of big ups and downs and this and that. But the trailing stop has done a pretty darn good job of hanging back there. So, interestingly enough, right? And this is weird, but I think I talked about this last week. So, this thing's up 22%, actually, as of yesterday's close. So it's down a couple of percent today, but, so it's up roughly 20%, but the target's like still way up here. which is crazy, but I believe that has to do with it has to do with the ranges, right? I mean, the ranges on this thing are just extraordinary. So if you go back and I mean, just look at these 2 days here. The high was $32 and the low was 25. And so in percentage terms, and then these days here too. So percentage wise, this particular day, um, huge percentage ranges. And so my guess is that that's why the system calculated that target, so far away from the entry. It's not typical, but anyway, so far so good. So next up we have GOLD. Speaking of gold, which is beauty. I mean, I got a lot drawn on here, so if you looked at this chart without any of the markups, you'd see like just a really nice sort of cup and a really nice change in trend that happened here. So you can see I drew this downtrend line, and then there's like your pivot low, trend line break. There was the trigger price, right? Right when the change in trend happened, the trigger price right there. And of course, it gapped a little bit over the trigger, but revisited the next few days. But that was a really good change in trend, and amazingly enough, I just connected these lows like a few weeks ago to sort of illustrate the change in trend. And look at that trailing stop's been sort of just hanging back below. And of course, these don't always indicate exactly when that trailing stop kicked in, right? So this is the most recent one here. This is from last night's update, this trailing stop 2570. But you can see that, it basically like poked at the target for a week and then broke above the target and just kind of used that target as support, and now it's starting to break away here and very close to the prior highs. So that was the first one of the gold, or the first one of the precious metal stocks, I should say, to trigger. So remember, at one point, a while back, we were going over when this one triggered, we were looking at the pending list, and there was several other like precious metal stocks on there that, by the way, are open trades now. And in my infinite wisdom, I suggested that you probably wouldn't want to get too concentrated in the sector. So maybe just go with like the first or second one that triggered. And so this was the first one, and Newmont is the second one. Now, quite frankly, this is a much more well-behaved chart, in my opinion. This is a better looking chart, to tell you the truth. It's not nearly as close to being back to the previous highs or whatever, and so and it's not percentage-wise, it's not up as much as Barrick Gold. But boy, that's just it's just a really sweet sort of pattern there, right? It's real nice, orderly. That's the word I was looking for. It seems like it's more of an orderly chart, and it could just be all this stuff I got drawn on here, but looking pretty good here. So here's the target up here at 64.50, and today's high 63.97. So it's close. It's pretty close, and other than some volatility around the initial trigger here, and there was some volatility at the trigger price, but it's the same sort of concept, right? There was a nice, it was a nice orderly sort of sell off here, and I guess this was the pivot low, but you really didn't know that because that particular day was very similar to this day, where you had a little sell down, you had a pivot low, but there was no change in trend there. And so this is a little tricky because it was a very similar sort of, you can see that right there, like those 2 days. I'll just connect those. It's very similar sort of lows, and the first one obviously was not the low of the pattern, but this one turned out to be the low of the pattern. And so what you had here is, and I'll draw that. So there's, it's pretty subtle, to tell you the truth. It's a very subtle sort of change in trend, but for whatever reason, the system picked it. It met all the criteria and set that initial stop right at you guys remember back in the old days, Jeffrey used to talk about the Magic X pattern or whatever. I don't even remember what that was, but I barely do. But anyway, he used to have this little Magic X, which, sort of indicated a change in trend. And then you'd set the stop right below like the X, right? And so that's basically what you got right here. You got like, the proverbial Magic X with the stop right. And of course, the stop is just basically below that pivot low right there. But anyway, long story short, so there was volatility at the point of entry, right? However, this particular day right here, where it made a higher low, and then you had like one of those sort of a key reversal day, and it popped right back up, and then it's off to the races. And basically, it looks to me like this cup is going to complete. So, and I mean, they don't. It's not. There's no guarantees it's going to complete all the way back to that high, but looks like from here. Oh, and that was just an arbitrary thing that I drew on the chart, right? This is the target's actually right here, but I believe at the time I drew this to sort of Where did I have that? Like up here? Yeah, this was just basically an illustration of the cup, right? And maybe that gap right there that I was talking about getting filled. But anyway, beautiful chart. Beauty of a chart with gold hitting highs. There's a lot of potential probably in these gold stocks. So anyways, there you go. Newmont was up 7.7% at yesterday's close, and now it's up another couple of percent. So looking good, looking like that target's in sight here. Moving down the list, here. So I started at the bottom, and so here we are. We're at this QDEL, which is up an incredible, as of last night's close, up an amazing 37%, right? And so today it's up another 7.5%. So this might turn out to be like the biggest winner ever. Anyway, so what's interesting about this QDEL is that if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to pull this up over at FinViz. So this would have been, and I knew this from years ago that these guys do blood testing, and so I just wanted to glance at the news here, and I'm sure this has something to do with COVID testing, right? So QDEL develops, manufactures, and markets diagnostic testing solutions for infectious diseases, right? And they've been doing that since well, let's see. It was founded in 1979. So, I want to say that years ago that I owned this stock at some point. Like, well, let's look at the monthly chart. I mean, I want to say that like back here in like the late 90s, early. Oh, and this would have been one to hang on to and forget about, right? Obviously, this monthly chart I have is a log chart, but anyway, so I think that what I think is that I know what it is that I used to own a stock that made blood testing kits, like technology or whatever, and these guys bought them. That's what it is. Anyway, yeah, there you go. So this thing's been moving. This thing's been moving since back in April, based on diagnostic blood testing kits. So, but there you go. Anyway, so long story short, all that aside, you can see here that this recent move is pretty extraordinary, and even as we speak today, it's actually breaking out of this big consolidation here. So 164 was the trigger price back over here, and of course we talk about this each week when I do the show, but this thing, fortunately, it got this huge pop like right off the bat. And so triggered in, and then within a couple of days, big pop, and then it's basically just extended that run up, and you don't hear much about it. It's not really in the news. That's why some stocks that really make significant moves, they do so kind of quietly behind the scenes, and they don't come on CNBC, and or at least I haven't seen much news on this. But I mean, obviously, a lot of people look through the new all-time highs list, and so I've always been a fan of William O'Neill and Can Slim and all that good stuff. And one of the big takeaways from the whole Can Slim thing, which I probably 30 years ago read that book, but the big takeaway from that is that you find the winners on the new all-time high list. And so anyway, obviously a lot of new all-time highs have happened in this, but just more recently when it started breaking out over here, it's showing up on the new all-time high list. And so there you go. huge mover. Probably one of the best ever. So, and then moving up the list here, we got another pretty big winner here, FOLD. Um, Same sort of thing. It triggered in. What this one triggered in like on a huge gap up, and I remember talking about that and saying that sometimes while it seemed really weird, sometimes you get a big gap on news like that, and it never looks back. That kicks off a big rally. So that was the case here, and then a couple days later, the big move basically came in just a couple of days. You see that a lot of times in stocks that they sort of they're sort of doing meandering around doing whatever, and then maybe some news breaks, and then you get just a really quick run to like a whole nother level. And so basically that's what's going on here. Excuse me, choking on my coffee. and And there you go. You can see how that stop has came up really super quick. And so now the stop's way up here just under the target. And the stock is sort of consolidating up here, above the targets. Looking pretty good. That thing was up 26% as of last night's close. And, so it's kind of unchanged so far today. WERN. This is look at all the marks I have on this chart. So these are just, as we discussed the stock, these were basically just where I was demonstrating or illustrating, sort of the uptrend, the pullback, the change in trend, and and there you go. And this I believe I said I just mocked that up because you didn't have a at the time there was no like low on this side. So I think I just like connected these two. So as of last week there was no point out in the distance to draw the uptrend line, but there you go. So as of right now, what was that? That was Thursday. Yeah, so Friday was a holiday. So yeah, so last Thursday kind of you put in like a little interim low and that it's bounced off of. So looking pretty good here on WERN. Um, while I'm here, now that we're getting within the vicinity of the target, a lot of times, sometimes I draw the targets on here right off the bat, and sometimes I don't. A lot of time I like to wait until the price at least looks like it's coming within the vicinity of the target, but that looks like a pretty doable target here at $46 even. You got kind of that nice cup pattern going on here. This was an unusual one. Remember I mentioned that because it's transportation trucking. That's kind of not something that you really not something that you really expect to like show up on the list of I don't even follow any trucking stocks really. So, but it is what it is. So, I got something going on here. I haven't seen a whole lot of trucking stocks ever cross my screens or radar recently anyway, I should say, but there you go. Good looking pattern there too, by the way. Spent a lot of time chopping around up and down the trigger price, but starting to pull away a little bit, and basically this is sort of it's been a little choppy, and it's not the most orderly chart that I've seen, but it illustrates the main concept. Stocks in an uptrend, has a pullback, either bases out or forms a pivot low or whatever, but you get that subtle trend change. There's that magic X again, right? I guess you could call it that. Jeffrey, I believe, coined that term years ago. We used to talk about, and basically the magic X pattern was just a little it's just basically where you draw the downtrend line and the uptrend line, where you get that change, where you get a change in trend, and then that sort of then you got like these four quadrants here, right? And of course the stop goes right under the little X part there. So, and that's where the initial stop started off here, And so you can see how it's trailed up little by little here, and stock's moving in the right direction. This will probably trail up again today, and target is within sight. So there you go. Not too bad. Now we got a tech stock, MDB. Mongo database. This thing's just hanging right around the target. Trailing stops just sort of hanging back here because there hasn't been, a whole lot of forward progress since, since I drew this, right? This trailing stop would have kicked in probably, over a week and a half ago. If you consider there was a 3-day weekend in here too. So, but hey, it is what it is. Another stock in an uptrend, had kind of a nasty sell off and bottomed out and then turned back up. And, in this trend, you could say that the trend is resuming. And so, hey, you don't know. I mean, this trend could just resume, and this thing could just continue to, to go up here, whatever. Kind of like it meandered for all this time over here. Same sort of thing. Like you had a sell off back here, right, and then you got kind of a trend resumption, little dip, and then look at the persistency of that trend. I mean, from the beginning of April all the way through the end of May, at a nice sort of orderly, persistent uptrend. And so then you have another dip like this, which you could say is similar to that one. And so you just never know how persistent and how long this particular trend could go. So anyway, so that's that. Mongo database looking pretty good. Hit the target, which is always a good thing. Now here's this next one here. We talked about this. Here's another example of what I was just talking about a minute ago. A stock sort of making the big move, in just a few days, right? So this one's unusual. And of course, LRN is, and let me pull this up real quick. I remember when we were talking about this one initially, when it when it was on the pending list, and even back here and all this, right? So even back on this prior trade. So what you're seeing here on the chart is actually two different swing trades, right? The first swing trade was back here in May. The entry was 23.50, and you can see the stops and the target, and so had a really nice move, and then went through the target and rallied way up here, and then started coming back down, and so there was the trailing stop had moved all the way up to 25.85. So basically, the idea of the system is going to try and stick with it. As long as it keeps going up, the system's going to try and stay with the move and keep that stop back just far enough to allow for normal price fluctuation, right? And so it does a pretty good job of that too. Normal price fluctuation, the trailing stop's gonna is gonna like be just far enough away that you're not going to get knocked out of it, and which is a good thing, right? So anyway, long story short, so triggered in over here, and then it had some volatility a couple of days later, but then it started moving up. But look at this. I mean, this is kind of this is a good example of why selling half at the target and letting the other half run under certain circumstances can work out pretty well. So this is an online education company, right? So makes a lot of sense that online education would be sort of a hot thing. Well, we discussed that, back here when this thing triggered in, and actually probably back here that, hey, online education seems like a pretty speaking of which, I want to look at CHGG. This is another online education stock. Now, this isn't one of the picks or trades or anything, but I just wanted to, I hadn't really looked in on this in a while, so there you go. Hot sector, right? But look at that move, just incredible. So anyways, LRN, good trade in it over here. Another good trade. This stop is oh, by the way, I hadn't mentioned this before, but parabolic stop, 32 bucks. So once you get a stock that makes sort of a parabolic move like this, right? The system, you can see this. You see this right here. The P stop, the parabolic stop on LRN sitting at 32 bucks. Basically what that means is, and see, this is I don't always mark these on here, but as long as we have this one, so it'd be a good time. So basically, you know, the regular trailing stop, as I always mention, is a function of price and time, right? And so when you get a stock that really accelerates to the upside and sort of goes parabolic, you know, not enough. This will probably move up tonight, but since the regular trailing stop's a function of price and time, if you get a stock that makes a significant parabolic move in a really short amount of time, it doesn't always have the time to catch up. So long story short, the parabolic stop kicks in, shows up, and that's where you'd basically want to protect profits, like say on the second half of the position, right? So trust me, I mean, you wouldn't want to let this thing like fade all the way back down to $29 and get stopped, you know, and get taken out down there. I mean, even though that would be still a great percentage gain from that. So when a stock starts going parabolic like this, then it's not a bad idea to protect the profits, squeeze as much as you can out of it. So there you go. I mean, something like this, you know, we looked at Tesla, right? And so same sort of thing applies. I mean, this thing could keep going, right? Make a crazy move. But as you can see over here, and so, you know, what I'm wondering now, and I don't know this, but, you know, maybe there was a parabolic stop over here that instead of letting it come all the way back, because I mean, over here it was at, it was at 28 bucks. And so this was, percentage wise, that was a pretty big move down to the trailing stop. But for all I know, and I didn't mark it on there, that looks like because the parabolic stop typically goes, just under the low of the previous day when it kicks in, or the previous couple of days. And so, there's a case where there could have been a P stop like right there that would have taken you out in a lot better, with a little bit of squeeze a little bit of an extra gain out of it than letting it just roll back over. So anyway, that's what that is, and there you go. So you can always, if you're in one of these things and you're holding the partial position or whatever, look for the parabolic stop. And there's one other one that's got a parabolic stop. Actually, two other ones. Fate. I didn't draw it on there, but the very first one here, 3630. There's a P stop. Parabolic stop way up here. I might as well put that on there because so let's see, 3630 is, what's today's low? 3636. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. P stop 3630. And on this one it kind of makes sense too, right? So a lot of times the parabolic stop though will get hit fairly quickly, but no big deal. Here's another one, like, the trigger was 3260. This open here was 33 and a half. And so, to let it come back down after all this time and just sort of get knocked out for a small gain doesn't make a whole as much sense as, as using a really super tight stop up here and capturing like, a significant gain, right? 20%. So roughly. So anyway, that's what the parabolic stop's all about. So let me move on here. I feel like I'm moving slow today. Or like I'm talking a lot, but there's just a lot of open trades basically. So anyhow, here's another good one. You guys remember this from last week and the week before. Um, Another precious metal stock that's, I mean, literally this thing's like, basically completing the cup pattern here today as we speak. It's right up back at the highs. A silver stock, interestingly enough. I remember when this thing used to be called, it used to be called Wheaton Minerals and had a different ticker symbol. And yeah, I think it was Wheaton, and before that it was something else. I'm gonna say this is another one that at one point or the other, I mean, way back in like the in like the early 2000s or something, I owned a silver stock that turned into this or something at some point in time. I don't remember what the story was, but there was some, back in guess it was like back in the 2000s or something like that, early 2000. I don't even remember what year, but yeah, there was a point where I was kind of into the precious metal stocks when they were doing their thing, and so they're doing it again. And nice uptrend, nice pullback, little base consolidation, change in trend, and there you go. Got that cup going. Um, here's the thing: is that different stocks have different volatility characteristics, I guess you could say. So while this looks more this looks more impressive than a couple of those other ones we looked at, sort of. Um, this thing was up. It was up 12% as of yesterday's close, and so it's up another 3.5% today. So now you're getting somewhere. Up 15%. You can see that this trailing stop sitting here at 41 is still kind of hanging back, right? It's hanging back. It'll probably come up fairly significantly now that the stocks actually start. It was consolidating, prior to yesterday and today, of course, it was still sort of consolidating here, right? Wasn't really, I mean, it was headed in the right direction, but it wasn't doing a whole lot. Now it's getting somewhere. So, and then, moving on here. FNV, Franco Nevada, another precious metal stock. And so that's what I was saying before. The original two, and by the way, like Barrick Gold and Newmont Mining, the first two precious metal stocks that hit the list, hit the open trades list, those are like the big guys, right? I mean, those two are they're like the bellwethers of the sector. And so these other ones, a little bit smaller companies. Well, a little bit. They could be like way smaller, but anyway, same concept here. Nice cup forming. Gap up today, kind of funky, and so. But it is what it is, and so this is probably the one that by the time all the other ones hit the list, this one's probably would have been would have been just like too much exposure. So. Central Garden and Pet Company. Looking pretty good. An odd sort of pattern. The run up, pull back, and then look at that. Like if I extend that initial stop there, it's just basically, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? So you had the pullback, and then the pullback kind of ended. Then the stock popped up, and here's another one that the move happened really quickly. Just a couple of days there, you basically, you triggered in here, and then boom, popped up, and now it's just kind of hanging right underneath the target, just kind of hanging back there, and so everything about this looks good, right? Look at this. The trailing stop has come up, it's basically just over the trigger. So it's a break even right now, right? Hanging right below the target. Stop at essentially break even, a little bit above it, and so it's a sort of a no lose situation. And I'm gonna put this back where it was because this thing didn't trigger in until, and so we're getting towards the ones that have triggered in more recently now. So looking pretty good. Moving up the list, QGEN. What's interesting about this one is, so let's see, 625. 625. Okay, so this one's kind of weird because, yeah, I had a feeling. This one basically gapped up, it closed above the trigger price, right? Trigger price was 43. You got to zoom in to see all this. Um, Closed way above it and then opened here the next day, right? And so, eh, the thing about this particular stock, and you can see this by looking at the scale over here, these 25-cent increments. So this is not an extremely high volatility stock, right? And so the trigger price, or trigger level, was 43. So this day it opens at 43.76, right? 75 cents more. But looking at the chart, I mean, it looks like a huge gap up. And so, looking at that chart that day, I would have questioned whether I wanted to just jump in right there. Right. And of course, there's a couple different ways that we've given you to deal with that. One is you can just say, well, I'm not going to chase that gap or whatever. I'm just going to set a limit order. Now that it's officially triggered in, I'm just going to set a limit order at the trigger price and see if it comes back down and catches it, which is viable. Um, Over a long series of trades, it probably won't matter, but I guarantee that you'll miss some. Like, some will gap up like this, and then they'll take off and never look back, and you'll be like, I should have just done it. And then, the other half of the time, you can just set a limit order at the trigger price, and then within a few days, you'll get filled, right? And so, and then Jeffrey's little hybrid strategy, which probably makes the most sense of all, is, and especially with the idea that there's zero commissions nowadays trading stocks. The hybrid approach is a jump in half a position, regardless when it triggers in, and then set your limit order for the other half, and then at least that way you're in if it does take off, and then if it pulls back a little bit. You get in half here, and then if it pulls back a little bit, you're not unhappy because you get filled on the other half. And of course, a couple of days later, you're thinking, "Oh, geez, that was a big mistake." But then it turned around, and so at this point here, your price sitting right about even, maybe up a little bit, and you're thinking, "Okay, great." So far so good. But this is a weird stock. NV means it's a foreign stock, so not particularly exciting, but could be forming like a little W. And so I could very easily see this working its way back towards these highs, but this is kind of a slow mover, right? So it is what it is. So the next one is a little bit more exciting. Akamai. Everybody knows Akamai, right? So Akamai, trigger right here above these highs, triggered in here, and then here's a good example of what I was just talking about. So that would have been this was the trigger level, and then this particular day on 6/26, so it triggered in, closed above the trigger level, and then the following day, it opened at 105.62, and your trigger was 103, and so you're thinking, well, oh boy, do I want to buy this thing? And so, going back to what I was just talking about, if you went ahead and just jumped in half a position, Yeah, great. And if you set your limit order for the other half down here, you never got filled, and now look at it, right? So speaking of which, the um, target on Akamai got hit. I never even put it on here. I mean, this is what day was this? Thursday. So yeah, this is right ahead of the 4th of July weekend. So I never got a chance to. I went through these things, but last week was basically sort of a holiday week, and I shut down my trading computer, all that good stuff. Shut it off for 3 4 days. Target on Akamai was 112.50, which I mean is basically like kind of hanging around there right now. But yeah, so this was one of those examples where even though the stock gap, the actual fill, just buying at the blindly buying at the open the day at when it triggers, would have been better off than like just setting a limit order at the trigger price you'd have never gotten filled, and then you can see it made a huge move. And so that's kind of that's why Jeffrey's little hybrid strategy seems to be the best. So you'd have been in on like half of a normal position on this, and so we recommend it. Typically you just want to use dollar amounts, right? Focus on the percentages, trade like the same dollar amount in the positions that you take. And so I mean, say you were gonna invest 2 grand in this, right? You buy $1,000 worth here, set a limit order for the other 1,000, and so all in all, you got in. But and the other thing is that since you didn't get filled and it made the big move, then the other half of the position you had allocated for this, you could just use it to to buy something else, right? Like that limit order clearly, you know after a few days after this big pop right here, there's no need to have the limit order to buy the other half in. So anyways, then, hey, you could say, well, all right, then I'm going to use that to take a position on the next one that comes along, which by the way was IPHI. Right? This one triggered on 6:30, which was that day, and so it's July 1st, 7/1, triggered in. Traded at the trigger price. Was a little bit over it here, but that's a beauty of a pattern right there. Look at that. Nice persistent uptrend, nice sort of pullback, and a beautiful basing out, and then turning back up. And so here you go. This thing's is basically like right back to the prior high. As a matter of fact, if it closed right here, well, it's close. This close right here was like the high, and it's like right back there. So what was that? 125.75. So it's like basically right back there. Anyway, this sort of pattern right here, um, this is the kind of pattern where this thing could easily break out here and make a pretty significant run. This is gorgeous. Looks like we had another trade in it back here or something, but yeah, this is a gorgeous pattern right here. So it could run into some resistance up here at the highs and pull back a little bit, but basically, if you just sort of focus on like the last 10 days or something, you got a really nice sort of stair step higher. So that's a beauty. So there's that, and we're almost done here. Wow. I can't believe I've been talking for an hour just going through this list here. All right, let's jam through this here. CCXI, this one's just now, triggering in within the past couple of days here. Biotech stock. Trailing stop starting off like way down here at the bottom of the pattern, but that kind of makes sense. So little forward progress, and this thing will come up pretty quick. PLAN just triggered in a few days back here on 7/2. Actually, it says 7/1, but that was the day. 7/1 was the day that it closed over the trigger price. A lot of forward progress here. up near the highs. Nice big cup forming, so that one's looking good. That stop's coming up pretty quick. And last but not least, QLYS, which basically triggered in yesterday at the open. I don't always have these drawn in the exact right spots. So 105 even. So it's down a little bit here. Sometimes I like draw them zoomed out a little bit. This one looks pretty good. I kind of like the look of this. I think we looked at this when it was on the pending list, maybe last week. That's probably why I drew like this little pivot low and then this little pivot low, and so it did manage to trigger in, and so that's a nice looking little pattern right there, right? If I extend that over like that, you can kind of see like it's got like the little W thing going on, and so I really like the look of this. So there you go. Anyhow, just now triggering in, and it's close enough for government work right to the trigger price here that I wouldn't sweat that. And even yesterday's open or whatever was right there. So there you go. $105. This one looks like it has a lot of promise. So I will leave it at that. That's all the open trades. And of course, all this information is dynamic and will change from day to day. So keep your eye on that. And I will see you guys here again next week.